History often feels inevitable. We look at the borders on a map, the languages we speak, the faiths we inherit, and assume that this is how the world was always meant to be. But beneath the surface of what we call reality lies a fragile architecture of contingency, an interconnected web of events, ideas, and decisions that could have unfolded in dramatically different ways. Among all the variables in the grand story of humanity, few are as consequential as the rise of Islam. Islam is not just a religion, it is one of the most powerful civilizational forces in history. In just a few centuries, it transformed tribal Arabia into an imperial superpower, reshaped the linguistic, cultural, and religious landscape of the Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia, and parts of Europe, and continues to define geopolitics today. But what if it had never existed? What if Muhammad had never had his revelations in the cave of Hira? What if the Quran had never been written, and the armies of Islam had never emerged from the Arabian Peninsula? To ask this question is to peel back the surface of history and stare directly into an alternate world, one where the absence of Islam does not merely remove a religion, but collapses an entire civilizational infrastructure. The consequences are profound, stretching from the borders of China to the shores of the Atlantic, from the Crusades to the Renaissance, from the Ottoman Empire to the very architecture of modern Europe. Let's begin with the most immediate consequence, the fate of the Middle East itself. In the absence of Islam, the Arabian Peninsula remains a tribal, fragmented society on the periphery of empires. Without a unifying religious and political force, Arabia never launches the extraordinary military campaigns that, within a century of Muhammad's death, had dismantled the Sassanid Persian Empire and stripped the Byzantine Empire of its richest provinces, Syria, Egypt, and North Africa. The Sassanid Empire, the last great Zoroastrian civilization, survives. Its long-standing rivalry with Byzantium continues, but over time, something remarkable happens. Freed from the destabilizing shock of the Islamic conquests, the Sassanids and Byzantines are forced into a kind of détente. Exhausted by centuries of warfare, these two superpowers gradually shift from open conflict to cold competition, with Persia maintaining its dominance over Mesopotamia, Iran, and Central Asia, while Byzantium consolidates its control over the Eastern Mediterranean, Anatolia, and the Levant. In this world, the Middle East remains a battlefield of Christian and Zoroastrian civilizational influence. The religious map of the region looks entirely different. Egypt remains Christian, its Coptic identity reinforced rather than marginalized. Syria continues as a center of Eastern Christianity. North Africa does not become Arabized. Instead, it develops as a hybrid space where Latin Christianity, Berber traditions, and Mediterranean commerce intertwine. The Arabic language never becomes a lingua franca from Morocco to Iraq. Instead, the linguistic map retains its older complexity: Coptic in Egypt, Aramaic in Syria and Mesopotamia, Berber languages in North Africa, and Persian dominating Iran and beyond. But the absence of Islam does not merely preserve the old world order, it transforms it. Without the Islamic Golden Age, the great translation movements that preserved and transmitted Greek, Persian, and Indian knowledge to the West never occur. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad is never founded. The works of Aristotle, Galen, Ptolemy, and Avicenna never pass through Arabic hands to re-enter Europe. This delay reverberates through time. The European Renaissance, heavily fueled by texts recovered via Islamic Spain and the Crusader encounters with the Muslim world, arrives centuries later, if at all. The scientific, mathematical, and medical advances that emerge from the Islamic world vanish from the timeline. Algebra, whose name derives from the Arabic al-Jabr, is never formalized. The decimal positional system, transmitted through the Arab world from India, reaches Europe only through indirect and much slower routes. Navigation, astronomy, optics, all fields that were revolutionized in the Islamic world, remain primitive by comparison. Europe itself follows a dramatically different trajectory. The Crusades, after all, were launched in response to the rise of Islam and the capture of Jerusalem. In this alternate timeline, there are no Muslim-controlled holy lands to reclaim. Instead, Europe's military energies are turned inward, on itself, or outward toward other theaters. The Spanish Reconquista never happens because there is no Islamic conquest of Iberia. Spain does not develop as a militant Catholic state forged in centuries of war against Muslims. The very concept of Christendom as a unified entity against an Islamic other is profoundly weakened. Without the unifying external pressure of the Islamic world, Europe remains fractured for much longer. The papacy, which gained much of its authority by positioning itself as the spiritual leader of Christendom in a cosmic battle against Islam, does not consolidate its power in the same way. Protestantism may still emerge, but in a very different form, without the Catholic Church having grown into the political behemoth it became in our timeline. The absence of Islamic maritime powers like the Ottomans also reshapes global exploration. The Ottoman blockade of eastern trade routes was one of the key drivers pushing Portugal and Spain to explore westward, eventually leading to the discovery of the Americas. Without this pressure, the age of exploration is delayed, redirected, or perhaps fundamentally different. The Americas may remain undiscovered by Europeans for another century, or be discovered under entirely different geopolitical conditions. Meanwhile, in Asia, the absence of Islam fundamentally alters the balance of power in the Indian subcontinent. Without Islamic invasions, the Hindu and Buddhist civilizations of India continue their development uninterrupted by the Delhi Sultanate, the Mughal Empire, and the countless other Muslim dynasties that reshaped South Asian history. The cultural, architectural, and linguistic landscapes of India are transformed. There is no Taj Mahal. Urdu, a language born of Persian, Arabic, and local dialects, never comes into existence. Sikhism, which emerged partly in response to the pressures of Hindu-Muslim interaction, never arises. Central Asia, too, remains under Persian and Turkic influence, but without the spread of Islam to unite diverse nomadic peoples under a common religious banner. The Mongol Empire, when it rises, encounters a completely different civilizational fabric. The fusion of Mongol and Islamic culture that produced the Timurid Renaissance, for instance, never occurs. Africa follows yet another divergent path. The great Islamic kingdoms of West Africa, Mali, Songhai, Kanem-Bornu, never convert to Islam. Without the religious and trade networks that Islam facilitated across the Sahara, these kingdoms develop more regionally contained systems of governance and trade. Timbuktu does not become a center of Islamic learning. The trans-Saharan slave trade takes different forms, or perhaps never reaches the same scale without the connective tissue of Islamic commerce. Even the modern political map looks unrecognizable. There is no Ottoman Empire to hold together the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Arab world for centuries. Instead, the Byzantine Empire perhaps survives longer, or collapses under entirely different pressures, perhaps from Slavic expansions or internal decline. The power vacuum left by the absence of Islam reshapes Europe, Africa, and Asia in unpredictable ways. And what of the Jewish people? Without the rise of Islam, Jewish communities do not experience the complex duality of life under Muslim rule, a mixture of tolerance and restriction codified in systems like dhimmi status. But they also avoid the expulsions from Islamic Spain and the forced conversions under various Muslim dynasties. Yet the flip side is that many of the great centers of Jewish life, Baghdad, Cairo, Cordoba, Istanbul, do not emerge in the same form. Jewish history is rerouted, for better or worse, along entirely different pathways. Perhaps most provocatively, the absence of Islam removes the single most persistent point of friction between the modern West and the Middle East. The Israeli-Arab conflict, the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, the rise of jihadist movements, all of these are products, directly or indirectly, of the post-Islamic world order. But this does not mean a world without conflict. New fault lines emerge. The rivalry between a surviving Persia and Byzantium might evolve into a millennia-long Cold War of its own. Africa and Europe may collide in different ways. East and West find new arenas for competition and cooperation. But one truth remains constant. The elimination of Islam does not create a world of harmony. It creates a world of different tensions, different empires, different spiritual and ideological struggles. Civilization abhors a vacuum. Where one force is removed, another rises to take its place. In the end, to imagine a world without Islam is not merely to delete a religion. It is to unravel a civilizational DNA strand that is woven into every corner of our modern world, from mathematics to medicine, from geopolitics to philosophy, from architecture to astronomy, the absence of Islam is the absence of an entire branch of human civilization. And perhaps that is the deeper lesson. History is not the story of inevitabilities, but of contingencies. Civilizations rise not because they are destined to, but because of choices, accidents, revelations, and the strange alchemy of time. Remove just one thread, the emergence of a prophet in 7th century Arabia, and the entire tapestry changes. The world we know exists because Islam exists. And had it never appeared, the world would be utterly unrecognizable, not better, not worse, but simply different.